Warning, the following video may contain sequences which some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Alright, so the case today is still ongoing, so unfortunately we won't be able to have a final verdict. However, I want to go over this because it raises some interesting questions. Today we will be going over the case of Lindsay Clancy. She is a former nurse who is now paralyzed from the waist down. Lindsay committed a crime that is horrible and atrocious. And honestly, at first when I was going over this case, I was thinking, wow, what a horrible human being. But then as I went deeper into it, it became difficult to call her that, assuming what I read is the truth. I'm sure right now you're wondering, what did she do? Well, she killed her 3 children, then tried to kill herself. Lindsay Clancy, as stated earlier, was a nurse. She was also the mother of 3. 2 sons and a daughter, Cora, who was 5, Dawson, who was 3, and Callan, who was only 8 months at the time of the murder. Let's understand a couple things about the family. Apparently, they were a wonderful family. No one had anything bad to say about them. And from what even I could see, they seemed like a pleasant family. Every single picture I found of this family was filled with just wholesome moments. Smiles all across the board. Birthdays, Christmas, pool visits, beach visits. They really seemed like they were a happy family with no issues. Of course, that's from the outside looking in. But in actuality, it was like that on the inside too, because Lindsay's husband, who has forgiven her for the crime by the way, stated that things were great as well. He stated that he took as much pride in being her husband as he did in being a father and felt lucky to have her in his life. He loves his wife immensely and still does to this day. I think that in itself speaks volumes. There is definitely more than meets the eye when it comes to this. After all, why would you forgive someone who murders your child? That's simply illogical and downright crazy, isn't it? Let's go over what happened in more detail. On January 24th, 2023, Lindsay asked her husband if he wanted to order takeout. He agreed, and he stepped out to do that, and a few other errands, I suppose. During this time, she carried out her plan. She strangled her children with exercise bands. After the murders, she attempted suicide. She locked herself in a bedroom, cutting her wrists, then jumping out of the window of their house. When her husband, who I forgot to mention earlier, name is Patrick, found her, she was in the backyard and seriously injured. He called an ambulance, then asked where the kids were. She told him they were in the basement. And when Patrick went into the house, he did indeed find the kids in the basement. 2 were already dead, but incredibly, their youngest son, Callan, who was the 8-month-old, he was still alive. When the authorities arrived, Patrick yelled out, "She killed the kids," much to their horror. Everyone was brought to hospitals where Cora and Dawson was pronounced dead. Callan, on the other hand, was fighting to stay alive and was under intensive care, but sadly, he did succumb to his injuries a few days later. Now, let's talk about the why. Why would she do such a thing? Well, Lindsay was suffering through severe postpartum depression, and that spiraled and developed into something much worse, postpartum psychosis. What on earth is that? Well, postpartum psychosis is classified as a mental health emergency. It affects a person's sense of reality, causing hallucinations, delusions, paranoia, and many other behavioral changes. And worst case scenario, the people who suffer with this attempt to harm themselves and their children. This condition is treatable, however, but early detection is key, as the chances for things to end well after that is much higher. This condition is rare, but is very dangerous. Symptoms include, as stated earlier, hallucinations, delusions, mood changes, depersonalization, unorganized thinking behavior, insomnia, agitation or high irritability, and thoughts of self-harm or harming others, especially their child. This condition is classified into 3 types: depressive, manic, or atypical. From what it sounds like, Lindsay suffered with the most dangerous one, the depressive postpartum psychosis. This is the one where self-harm and child harm tends to take place. You might be wondering, so what does this have to do with anything? How does it justify her actions? Well, I wouldn't necessarily say it justifies them. Something that is wrong will always be wrong, but it does shed light as to why this happened. It will affect the final sentencing, and it does bring to light something that should really be looked at and taken more seriously in general. In the weeks leading up to the murders, Lindsay was feeling detached and emotionless towards her children, and was unable to express any sort of happiness, sadness, or even cry. It was so bad that she voluntarily turned herself into a psychiatric hospital and spent 5 days there before returning home. Patrick also stated that he was aware of the mental illness and she was taking medication for it. However, something else that he stated was that he believed she was heavily overmedicated. How many different meds was she on? She had been prescribed over a dozen in the past, so much so that her husband even complained about the amount of them she had to take at once. But at the time of the murders, she was on Valium, Zoloft, Trazodone, Ativan, Klonopin, Prozac, and Seroquel, and she took at least 4 prescriptions a day. Now, I'm no doctor, but based on what I know and on my own personal experiences, I can tell you, mixing all those meds together can almost never result in anything good. So to be completely honest, I'm inclined to agree with her husband. It truly does seem like she was overly medicated. Now in the court trial, the prosecution tried to counter and say that she was tested before and didn't have this mental illness. But I find that hard to believe when even the police, in conducting searches, found the several antidepressants she was prescribed. Something beyond just the crime is going on here. I think what really sold that fact to me is her husband forgiving her, and not only did he forgive her, but he urged the public to forgive her as well. No parent would want their child's killer to be forgiven. And remember, people around them did describe them as a happy family. Patrick described his family as being wonderful, but he can attest to things changing when she became so medicated. With antidepressants, they do just that, suppress your emotions, not just the sad, everything. People on antidepressants often feel numb to everything. Even if it's not every waking second of being on those meds, they do cause that. Now take that numb feeling and multiply it by over a dozen. This woman was being conditioned into being an emotionless thing. She said it herself. She started to feel detached, unable to express emotion for her kids. And well, add postpartum psychosis into that, and you got a catastrophic disaster waiting to happen. So many things in this case point to mental illness being the real culprit here. She tried to get help before it happened. She admitted herself.
Let me repeat that.
Lindsay Clancy, the murderer, admitted herself into a mental institution before the murders happened. She knew what was going on in her head. She knew she needed help before something happened, and she tried to get it, but it just wasn't enough. In the end, things still turned out bad. Trying to figure out what could have been done differently, and I couldn't even think of something. I can't say she should have tried to get help, because she did. The help she got did nothing but overly medicate her. Her husband was supportive throughout all of it. I really don't know what could have been done to change the outcome of this. The prosecution in her trial is trying to paint her as a wicked, evil woman. But I just can't see her like that. I really can't, and I've tried. There's too much evidence that shows me that the reason for this is not a malicious woman, but a mental illness that was pulling the strings behind the scenes. The defense is trying to prove that she should not be held criminally accountable for this. We will just have to wait and see what happens in the end, but based on how things are going, I think the defense will probably win this. The biggest point the prosecution has, in my opinion, is that in her search history leading up to the murders, she did look up ways to kill. But again, People with that mental illness, postpartum psychosis, this kind of behavior isn't uncommon among them. Even when looking at how the public views this case, a woman stated that she suffered with that as well, and though she is better now, she thinks back to when she wasn't cured and her thoughts from back then were haunting. The aforementioned woman then expressed how grateful she was that she got the help needed to have her treated before it was too late. Because she could have ended up like Lindsay if things played out differently. Of course, playing devil's advocate here, this could all just be an insanely well thought out and meticulous triple homicide and attempted suicide. But to that I just have to ask, to what end? What would she gain from doing any of this? Killing her children, what would she possibly gain from it? She tried to end her own life after. What would she gain from doing that? Did she want to hurt her husband? Of course not. They had a great relationship. Both of the parties have expressed this. So really, could you sit back and say that this woman did this out of malice? I really just can't say that it was out of malice. Maybe as the trial moves on, more things might come to light. But I highly doubt anything else can be said that would be so groundbreaking that it would change the tide of the entire case, but maybe I'm wrong here. Nevertheless, as of right now, though the act was horrible and truly saddening, I don't think this woman is as wicked as they're trying to portray her to be. I agree with her husband. This wasn't the real her doing the killing. She's at the mercy of the law now, and her attorneys are doing the best they can. Hopefully, in the end, whatever judgment is given is fair. Her 3 children will never come back, and she will have to answer for her crimes. But whatever happens, I just hope that it will be fair and something both she, her husband, and her family can accept and move forward with.